Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're wrestling with a question that I think haunts pretty much everyone, even if we don't say it out loud.
It's definitely an uncomfortable one.
It really is. It's a question about human nature, about money in our pockets, and ultimately, it's about fear.
It's the fundamental paradox of our species, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The question is basically this. Why is it that humans, who are arguably the most intelligent, sophisticated species on the planet, why are we the only ones who hoard resources far beyond what we actually need?
It's a striking observation when you really sit with it.
Hmm.
You look at a squirrel in your backyard.
Right.
It gathers nuts for the winter. It has a specific target, like a calorie count, a specific time frame.
It's just enough to get by.
Exactly. Once it has enough to survive the cold, it stops. It doesn't try to own every nut in the forest. It doesn't create a shell corporation to hide nuts from other squirrels.
There are no squirrel hedge funds. There's no squirrel billionaire sitting on a pile of acorns while the other squirrels freeze and starve.
Exactly. But humans, we accumulate wealth that we couldn't possibly spend in 10 lifetimes. And we don't just do it, we actually celebrate it.
We structure our entire lives around it. We measure our entire worth by it.
And we call it being prudent.
Right. We call it success. But the stack of sources we're diving into today, it totally flips that narrative completely on its head.
It really does.
We're looking at a fascinating and honestly quite radical analysis of human psychology and economics. For you listening, we're doing a deep dive into the Quranic commentary of the mid-20th century thinker Ghulam Ahmed Pervez.
Specifically, we're breaking down his works titled Beyond the Hoarding Mind, Divine Economics, and his detailed architectural blueprint for a concept called
Nizam-e-Rubiyat. It's a mouthful.
It is, but by the end of this hour, that term might just change how you look at your bank account, your insurance policy, and your neighbors.
So set the stage for us. We aren't just talking about a religious text here, are we? This isn't a sermon.
Not at all. And that's what makes Pervez's approach so compelling for a modern audience, really regardless of their faith background. He treats these verses, specifically from Surah al-Baqarah, verses 261 to 270, not just as spiritual advice, but as a sociological and economic thesis.
So he's reading it like a blueprint.
Exactly. He's arguing that what we consider smart economics, saving everything for a rainy day, looking out for number one, is actually a symptom of a primitive, fear-based malfunction of the intellect.
A malfunction. That is a really strong word. Because usually we think of self-preservation as the ultimate function, right? Not a malfunction.
Oh, it is the ultimate function for a solitary animal. But for a social species capable of building civilizations, the sources argue it becomes a glitch. The sources describe this as a fundamental conflict between survival logic and collective welfare.
And the mission of this deep dive is to unpack the blueprint for what the text calls a just economic order.
Right.
Which claims to be a system that doesn't just ask you to be charitable. It doesn't just say, hey, be nice to people. It claims to solve the root cause of the fear of poverty.
And I love that framing, because charity is usually a bandage, right? You're bleeding, here's a Band-Aid. This sounds like preventative medicine.
It's actually more like reconstructive surgery.
Oh, wow.
We aren't just talking about giving away old clothes or writing a check at the end of the year so you can feel good about yourself. We're looking at re-engineering the human intellect, moving from a psychological state of constant anxiety, what the text actually calls a satanic influence, to a socio-political state of absolute security.
Re-engineering the intellect. I'm hooked. So to guide us through this massive topic, we have a roadmap.
Yep, we do. We're going to start with the hardware, the brain itself, the two types of intellect described in the sources.
Then we'll look at the satanic nature of economic anxiety. And trust me, for those listening, the definition of satanic here is probably not what you're thinking.
Right, it's a psychological definition, absolutely.
Then we'll explore some incredibly powerful metaphors used in the text. The farmer and the destroyed garden, which totally redefine how we see the future.
And finally, we will land on the solution, the Nizam-e-Rubiyat, or the system of universal nourishment.
It's a journey from the problem of the mind to the solution of the state.
Let's start with the hardware then, the brain. The sources make a really sharp distinction between two types of intellect, Aqli Kud Bin and Aqli Jahan Bin. Let's decode that first one.
Right. Aqli Kud Bin. The translation here is crucial. It means the intellect.
Self-seeing, so the...
Precisely. The me brain. The sources describe this as the default factory setting of the human mind. It is deeply rooted in our primitive survival instincts. When you're operating with a self-seeing intellect, your primary and often your only calculation is individual profit and loss.
Which, to be fair to our ancestors, totally makes sense biologically. If I'm a caveman or I'm out in the wild, I need to make sure I eat.
Yes.
If I don't look out for me, who will?
Exactly. The text isn't saying this is evil in a cartoonish sense. It's saying it's primitive. It is.
Blind how?
Well, the text emphasizes this blindness repeatedly. The self-seeing intellect views the world through a tiny keyhole. It sees my hunger, my cold, my family.
Right.
It cannot see the suffering of the neighbor, or if it does see it, it views that suffering as irrelevant data. It's noise, not signal.
The text actually uses the phrase blind to the suffering of others, but here's where it gets nuanced, and the sources make a huge point of this. This self-seeing intellect can be incredibly smart, right? It's not about being stupid.
Oh, absolutely. That is the most dangerous misconception, that selfish people are somehow unintelligent.
Right.
The source material points out that a thief can be incredibly intelligent. A hoarder can be an absolute genius at the stock market. You can use massive computing power to figure out how to exploit a tax loophole or corner a market.
That takes a lot of brain power.
That is high intelligence. It requires planning, foresight, calculation.
Right.
But it is still akle good bin. It is still self-seeing. It represents intelligence weaponized for the self.
Weaponized intelligence.
It's like having a supercomputer dedicated solely to playing solitaire.
Yeah.
You have all this processing power, but the objective function is incredibly narrow. Just increase my score.
So intelligence isn't the cure for selfishness. You can't just educate people into being good, because we have plenty of Ivy League educated people who are still operating with this self-seeing intellect.
No, you can't. Intelligence is just a tool like a hammer. If the hammer is held by the self-seeing mind, it just becomes a more efficient way to build walls around yourself.
Oh.
That's why the sources argue that human intellect naturally leans towards selfishness. It's gravity. You don't have to teach a child to say mine. You have to teach them to share. The default state is acquisition.
So how do we break that gravity? That brings us to the upgrade, the second type of intellect, akli bin.
The world-seeing intellect. This is the counter perspective. This is the state of mind where the scope of concern expands from the individual to the profit of all humanity. What the text calls the Buddhi-Dhamma.
But if our biology defaults to the self-seeing mode, if we're wired for survival, how do we actually get to the world-seeing mode? The sources seem pretty adamant that you can't just brainstorm your way there. You can't just think really hard and become selfless.
Correct. And this is where the text introduces the necessity of external data. The argument Pervez makes, based on these Quranic commentaries, is that the human intellect is trapped in a box of self-preservation. It cannot see outside the box on its own because the box is made of its own instincts. It needs a light from outside. This is where the concept of wahi, or divine revelation, comes in.
Now, for you listeners who might be secular or skeptical of religious texts, let's strip the theology down to the structural argument Pervez is actually making here.
Good idea.
He's saying that because our internal hardware is wired for me, we need an external software update to rewire us for us.
That is a perfect analogy. The text argues that wahi revelation provides something that raw intelligence totally lacks. It provides
Hikmat, that translates to wisdom, right?
Yes, but in this specific context, it means divine wisdom that explains why. See, the self-seeing mind has a very strong logic. So it says, if I give this money away, I have less money. If I have less money, I am vulnerable. Therefore, giving is bad for me. That is a perfectly valid logical statement.
It's simple math. It's subtraction. I have 10 apples. I give you 5. I have 5. 5 is less than 10. Losing is bad.
Exactly. But it's short-term math. Hikmat, or wisdom, introduces long-term systemic logic. It explains the laws of cause and consequence that the primitive mind just can't see.
Right.
It provides the argument that true security is actually found in sharing, not isolating. It counters the short-term logic of keeping with the long-term logic of circulation.
So wisdom isn't just a command. It's not just, hey, do this because I said so. The sources emphasize that hikmat is about persuasion through logic.
Exactly. The text says revelation doesn't just issue dictatorial commands. It respects the human intellect.
That's interesting.
It provides the underlying objectives. It argues with the human mind to prove that the self-seeing view is actually self-destructive in the long run. It treats the human as a rational being that just has bad data.
Bad data leads to bad decisions. And the worst decision, according to these texts, is hoarding. This leads us directly into the mechanism of that bad decision-making.
This is the core of it.
This was the part of the reading that really grabbed me, the psychology of hoarding. The text uses a very charged word to describe the root cause. It calls the fear of poverty satanic.
It does, and we need to be careful to parse this exactly as the expert commentary does. When the text says satanic influence in this economic context, it is not talking about a guy in a red suit with a pitchfork poking you.
Let's clarify that. We aren't talking about demonic possession here. We're talking about anxiety.
The source explicitly states the fear of poverty is identified as a deceptive satanic influence. Think about what that fear actually does to you. It manipulates those survival instincts we talked about. It whispers to you.
I think we all know that whisper. It's the voice at 3 a.m. It's the voice that hits you when you read a headline about the economy slowing down or inflation spiking.
Right. It's the voice that says, what if the industry changes? What if AI takes your job next year? You don't have enough saved. You need more. You can't afford to help your cousin. You might need that money for medical bills.
It's the what if generator.
Precisely. The text describes this internal monologue as deceptive, logical-sounding justifications. That's the satanic trick. It doesn't sound crazy. It sounds prudent. It sounds responsible. If trouble comes tomorrow, who will take care of you?
And that question, who will take care of you, is the anchor of the fear.
It is. And the source says this voice is the primary obstacle to justice. Because if you listen to that voice, which is the voice of the self-seeing intellect, you become hyper-focused on self-preservation.
You pull up the drawbridge.
Exactly. You become blind to the community. You cannot build a sharing society if every single member is terrified of the future.
It effectively locks you in a prison of your own making. You have the money, but you don't actually have peace. You just have the fear of losing the money. It's a treadmill that never stops.
And that fear creates a scarcity mindset, even in the midst of abundance. This is the paradox Pervez highlights. You could be a millionaire. You could have enough to last 3 lifetimes.
Right.
But if you are gripped by this satanic fear of poverty, you act as if you're destitute. You hoard, you cut corners, you exploit employees, not because you strictly need to, but because the fear tells you it's never enough. The hole in the bucket is the anxiety, not the bank account.
So the text posits that this fear is the root of economic inequality. It's not just that some people are bad and greedy. It's that we have a systemic cultural anxiety about survival.
Yes. If everyone is afraid of drowning, everyone will fight for the lifeboats, even if the ship isn't sinking yet. And to break that anxiety, the commentary introduces some profound restructuring of how we view time in the future.
Which brings us to the concept of akhirat.
Right.
Now, usually, akhirat is translated in Islamic theology as the afterlife. Heaven, hell, judgment day, standard religious metaphysics. But Pervez's commentary takes a much broader, almost secularly applicable view here, doesn't it?
It expands the definition significantly. The sources argue that akhirat refers to the future in a holistic sense. Yes, it includes the life to come, but it explicitly includes the long-term consequences of our current actions in this life and the well-being of future generations.
So it's not just about what happens when you die. It's about the legacy you leave. It's about the world your grandkids will live in. It's the long now.
It's about the horizon of time. The self-seeing mind thinks in days, months, maybe a fiscal quarter. The world-seeing mind, guided by this concept of akhirat, thinks in generations. It asks, what kind of world am I building for my children and their children? It acknowledges that I am a link in a chain, not the whole chain.
To illustrate this shift in perspective, the text uses 2 really powerful metaphors. I want to spend some time on these because they really visualize the theory. The first one is the farmer.
This is a beautiful image, and it's one that would have resonated deeply with an agrarian society, but it holds up completely today. Think about the act of farming. The source text describes a farmer taking a bag of grain. This is food.
Right.
He could bake bread with it today. He could feed his hungry kids right now. It is immediate gratification.
Is his immediate wealth. You can eat it today.
But what does he do? He walks out into the mud and he throws it away. He buries it.
To a short-sighted person, to the self-seeing eye that looks insane, you're throwing away your dinner. You're burying your wealth in the dirt where it will rot.
Exactly. To the self-seeing mind, it looks like loss. It looks like a subtraction from his net worth. But the farmer has conviction in the future. He labors today, he sweats, he gives up his immediate consumption because he trusts the laws of nature.
He has faith in the system.
He does. He knows that the seed, if buried and nurtured, will return multiplied.
The source says, true faith requires investing resources in society now for a prosperous tomorrow. It's delayed gratification on a societal scale.
It is. The text argues that you cannot just consume everything you have today. You have to sow your wealth into the community. It feels like a loss in the short term, just like burying the seed.
Hmm.
But the harvest is a secure, thriving society that benefits everyone, including you.
Right.
The return on investment isn't just more money, it's a stable world where you don't have to build 10-foot walls around your house.
But then we have the flip side, the nightmare scenario. The second metaphor is the destroyed garden. This one felt, I don't know, cinematic, like a disaster movie.
It is designed to be terrifying. It is designed to induce a specific kind of realization. The text asks you to imagine a successful man. He has a lush garden. That's his wealth, his 401k, his property portfolio, his stocks.
His whole safety net.
Exactly. It's irrigated, it's fruitful. He walks through it and feels safe. He looks at the grapes and the date palms and thinks, I have done it. I am independent. I don't need anyone.
There's always a catch.
Time. The man grows old. The text is very specific here. He becomes frail. He can no longer work the land. At the same time, his children are described as young and weak. They're dependents.
Oh, no.
So you have a vulnerable family structure that is reliant entirely on the output of this one garden.
And then the fiery whirlwind hits.
A sudden disaster. In the ancient context, a literal fire. In our context, a market crash, a hyperinflation event, a diagnosis of a chronic illness that insurance won't cover, a war, a pandemic. The garden is incinerated.
The text really highlights the terror of this moment. You
Yeah.
are old, your kids are helpless, and your one source of security is ash.
The insight here is vital. The commentary argues that individual wealth is inherently fragile. It doesn't matter how big your garden is, a whirlwind can always destroy it. And if your only security was that private garden, you are now completely destitute. You are at zero.
This is the aha moment the text points out. Personal hoarding cannot protect you from everything. You can't save enough to outrun fate.
Correct. The text is dismantling the illusion of self-reliance. It's asking, what happens when the garden burns? Who catches you? If the answer is no one, then you've lived your life in a state of delusion.
That's intense.
The only thing that could protect that old man and his children in that scenario is not a private garden, but a supportive community.
Because if his garden burns, but he lives in a society that guarantees his care, the whirlwind is a tragedy, but it's not a death sentence.
Exactly. And that realization that private wealth is fragile and collective support is robust, that is the bridge to the solution. It moves us from the problem to the Nizami Rububiyat.
The system of universal nourishment. Let's break this down, because this is the core proposal of the entire stack of sources. This isn't just, hey, be nice to poor people. This is a massive structural change.
It is a political and economic structure. Rububiyat comes from the Arabic root rab. You often hear this translated as Lord, but the etymological meaning Pervez focuses on is sustainer, nourisher, or one who helps something grow from potential to completion.
So it's a growth-oriented system.
It is a system designed to sustain everyone. The text frames it as a universal social contract.
I like the way you put it earlier. It's the ultimate insurance policy.
That's exactly how the logic works. Think back to that fear the satanic whisper. Who will take care of me?
Mhm.
The Nizam-e Rububiyat answers that question loudly, officially, and legally. The state, the community, the system guarantees the provision and welfare of every individual.
So let's play this out. If I live in this system, I know, and I really know, because it's guaranteed that if I get sick, I'm covered. If I die, my kids will be fed, educated, and housed. If I lose my job, I won't lose my home.
Yes, and if you know that,
Hmm.
what happens to the fear?
It vanishes, or at least the panic vanishes. The existential dread is gone.
The fear is neutralized. The source quote is very direct. The most practical way to eliminate the fear of poverty is to remove the threat of destitution. You cannot psychologically cure the hoarding mind without structurally removing the danger that causes it.
It's like trying to tell someone not to be afraid of drowning while they're treading water in the middle of the ocean. You can yell, "Don't panic," all you want, but if you want them to stop panicking, you have to put them on a boat.
Exactly. That is a brilliant way to put it. The Nizam-e Rububiyat is the boat. And once you are on the boat, once that existential threat is removed, the intellect can finally relax. It can shift from self-seeing to world-seeing.
Because you aren't operating in survival mode anymore.
Right. You don't need to hoard millions for a rainy day if the system itself is the umbrella.
This leads to the economic mechanic the text talks about, open economic circulation.
Yes. The text compares wealth to blood in the human body. This is a classic medical analogy that Pervez really leans into.
I remember this. If blood gathers in one place, it's not a reserve, it's a clot.
And a clot causes sickness, gangrene, or death. It causes a stroke. The text argues that accumulation, hoarding wealth in stagnant pools, whether in offshore accounts or under a mattress, causes societal thickness. It deprives the rest of the body of oxygen.
So the Nizam-e-Rubaiyat mandates that wealth must flow.
It must circulate. Surplus must move from where it is created to where it is needed. But this is critical. It's not just taking from the rich to give to the poor like Robin Hood. It's based on a fundamental reevaluation of where wealth comes from in the first place.
This brings up a really interesting distinction the text makes between labor and resources. This is part of the divine economics section.
This is a fascinating economic argument, and it challenges the core of how we think about ownership. The commentary breaks it down like this. In any production of wealth, let's say growing wheat, there are two distinct components. There's the human effort, plowing, watering, harvesting, threshing. That is labor.
Right. I did the work, I broke my back, so I should get the wheat. That's the standard capitalist argument. I earned it.
But wait, the text asks a follow-up question. Who provided the soil? Who provided the rain? Who provided the sun? Who designed the biological law that makes one seed turn into 700 grains?
God, or nature, if you want to look at it secularly. But the point is, the human didn't invent the soil. I didn't code the DNA of the wheat.
Exactly. The human provided the labor, but God provided the capital, the resources, and the laws of growth. Therefore, the text argues, the provider of capital is entitled to a share of the profit, just like a silent partner in a business who puts up the money.
And this is what the sources call God's share, or hack.
Yes. Since God provides the foundational resources, he claims a dividend. But, and this is the crucial part that turns theology into sociology, God doesn't eat wheat. God doesn't have a bank account. God doesn't need shoes.
So where does the dividend go? If the silent partner doesn't collect, who does?
The text is explicit. God's share goes to God's dependents, the hungry, the impoverished, those unable to earn. The share is the mechanism of redistribution. It's not charity. It's a dividend payment to the owners of the resource base, who are, in this view, all of humanity.
I love that framing. It completely removes the ego from charity. It's not, I'm so benevolent, look at me giving you my money. It's, I'm paying the rent on the earth I used, and that rent goes to the poor.
It changes the power dynamic completely. It's a matter of right or hack, not a favor. The poor have a right to the surplus because it represents the resource share of the production.
Now, there is a counter-argument that the text brings up. It calls it the disbeliever's argument, but honestly, I hear it today in political debates all the time. It goes like this. If God is the sustainer, why doesn't he just feed them?
Oh, yes.
If God loves the poor, why are they poor? Why is it my job to fix God's mistake?
The fatalistic argument. If they are poor, it must be God's will or karma or destiny. The sources we have absolutely tear this argument apart. They call it deceptive logic used to justify greed.
The speaker in the source text gets pretty fired up about this. He says, God provides the rain, but you have to plow the field.
Right. The analysis clarifies that God's provision acts through human agency. The system, the nizam, is the mechanism. God provides the potential, the rain, but humans must build the aqueducts. If the poor are hungry, it's not because God failed to provide resources, the earth produces enough food. It's because the humans failed to distribute the share.
It puts the responsibility squarely back on us. We are the hands of that provision.
Precisely. To say God will feed them while you hoard the surplus is, according to these texts, a fundamental betrayal of the trust placed in you. It's actually categorized as a form of disbelief because you are denying the very mechanism of the universe, which is circulation and interdependence.
That is a heavy responsibility. It basically says if your neighbor sleeps hungry, it's not bad luck. It's a systemic failure that you are part of.
Precisely. And in a globalized world, that neighbor might be on the other side of the planet, but the principle holds.
So we've got the two intellects, the fear of poverty, the metaphors of the future, and this system of universal insurance. But I want to touch on one more thing before we wrap up. The role of human desire.
Yes, this is crucial.
Because sometimes when you hear, don't hoard and give away your surplus, it sounds like we all need to become monks. We should just wear burlap sacks, eat gruel, and have zero ambition.
And the sources explicitly reject that. This is the section on guiding instincts versus asceticism.
Right. The text critiques asceticism, the idea of killing your desires to be holy.
Pervez's commentary is very modern in this psychological regard. It argues that human emotions, desires, and survival instincts are engines. They're powerful forces. If you destroy the engine, if you kill the desire to achieve or acquire, the car stops. Society stagnates. You don't want a society of people who don't care about progress.
You need that drive. You need the ambition to build the garden in the first
That's
place.
exactly. The goal of revelation and of the world-seeing intellect isn't to destroy the engine, it is to steer the car.
I like that image. The engine is self-preservation, but the steering wheel is revelation.
Yes. The text says emotions should be guided to produce positive action. So work hard, earn, create wealth, invent things, but let that drive be steered toward collective security. Don't build a garden just for yourself. Build a garden that feeds the town. The ambition remains, but the purpose shifts.
It's a shift from me versus the world to me within a secure world.
That is the synthesis. We start with the fear of poverty, that satanic whisper that says we are alone. That leads to the self-seeing intellect that hoards.
But then we realize the fragility. We see the destroyed garden. We realize that hoarding is a trap, a temporary illusion of safety.
And that realization leads us to the Nizam-e-Rububiyyat. We build a system that guarantees security for all. In doing so, we finally satisfy that deep, primitive need for safety, but we do it together rather than at each other's expense.
It's a fascinating blueprint. It takes these ancient texts and pulls out a socioeconomic theory that feels incredibly relevant to the anxieties we face today for you listening. With the gig economy, the erosion of pensions, the cost of living crises, that whirlwind feels closer than ever.
It really does. It challenges the assumption that greed is the only engine for progress. It suggests that true, universal security might actually be a more powerful foundation for human flourishing. Imagine what humans could create if they weren't wasting 50% of their CPU power worrying about paying rent.
That's a powerful thought. So here's the thought I want to leave you with, listeners. The source material suggests that true faith isn't just about rituals or what you believe in your heart. It suggests that true faith is the active construction of an economic system where no one sleeps hungry.
That's the ultimate challenge.
The challenge is, if such a system doesn't exist, can our society claim to be faithful? Can we claim to be civilized? Or are we just squirrels with bigger nuts and more anxiety?
A provocative question to end on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of universal nourishment. It's given us a lot to think about regarding our wallets, our fears, and our future.
It certainly has.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.